Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a heap of registrations, lots of people flowing through. So excited to have you here. We got Anne in Hervey Bay, David, Southeast Queensland, Dennis in Seattle. Awesome. I've never been to Seattle. I want to go to Seattle here. It's a lovely city. Cool. Thank you very much for joining us. We are talking home pages, which is why we just had Edward Sharp and the Magnetic Zeros talking going home. And the reality from a design perspective and a homepage perspective is people do judge a book by its cover. And I'm the author of this book, Love at First Sight, How to Build the Website of Your Dreams. This wonderful man on our screen, Semi, he did all the design in this. There is a small part of his soul that was lost in this book.
We got it back.
So we are going to kick off. The big hulk of a man, Sammy. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself? He's shaking his head. Would you like to introduce yourself and just tell us who you are and what you do and what you spend your days doing?
Sure thing. So as John said, my name's Sam. I head up the design department here at 5x5. So I am basically in charge of all the visual / user experience elements that come with all our product builds. We primarily focus on WordPress websites. So day in, day out, that's usually what I'm on. If I'm not doing that, then I'm placing together logos and branding for organizations. And I've been working for 5x5. I don't know if I said this, for 9 years. So
and still smiling. He hasn't got grey hairs like I do. So Sam has a wealth of experience. And between the two of us, we literally started in a little cubicle just here in Miami and the Gold Coast, and just built websites, designed and built websites together, made a heap of mistakes, learnt a heap. And the intention of today is to share with you some of those learnings. The reason that we are talking homepages is because it is the most trafficked page typically on a website. And one of the critical things is, when you're walking down the street, you see someone, it actually takes the brain a 1/10 of a second to form an impression on someone, whether that's right or wrong. That's how quickly that happens. And websites are no different. In fact, it's half the time. In researching this, it was pretty standard to find that it's actually twice as quick that people are forming these impressions when it comes to a homepage. So we've all been using the internet for roughly the last 20 or so years. It is important that we follow simple and familiar design cues. Do not confuse the user. Make sure that commonly held conventions like clicking on the client's logo goes back to the homepage. Having your contact button or navigation item up in the top right-hand corner makes sense. So follow these conventions. We're going to run through some of these conventions. If we can make a good first impression, the ultimate result, it's going to be a longer visit for an end user. And conversely, poor design is ultimately going to create mistrust with your users. So there's a tremendous opportunity here to innovate, differentiate in the world and the events of the last 18 months. Like digital has become more and more important. So this is your shop front. You have one chance at that. So it's important that you nail all these bits and pieces. So I love this quote. This quote says, "Styles come and go. Good design is a language." We're not talking styles, we're talking language. So Sammy is a very accomplished blue belt jiu-jitsu player. I got interested just watching his journey, and I took it up about 9 months ago. And the analogy of learning jiu-jitsu or martial art to language is it's actually pretty similar, right? So you learn these lots of little pieces of the puzzle, which are like your vowels or your sounds, and you combine those into words, and then from the words you can form sentences. And that allows you to speak a specific language. And in jiu-jitsu, that might be like choking someone or breaking their arm. But in design, it's all around using these visual cues and conventions and commonly held sort of principles to communicate information. So this man that said this quote, Massimo, he's actually responsible for the New York subway map, which he designed in 1972. Using this design language, it's still active today. It's been iterated and updated, but the fundamental design is the same. It took what was a very confusing set of railway lines and intersections and all that sort of stuff and converted that to a world famous design that stood the test of time for almost 50 years. So first impressions are 94% design related. So it's super critical that we are nailing this design. We look at the numbers. These 6 sections on a website that draw the most interest from viewers, specifically here on the homepage, are the institution's logo, which is why we put such emphasis on branding. When we engage with a client, we want to make sure their brand is rock solid. That's the foundation that we're building everything on. That's why we did a whole webinar on branding. We will look at the main navigation menu, so that allows the end user to be able to navigate through the website. Search, depending on the style of the website, obviously e-commerce, super critical that you've got your search in a very prominent position. Site's main image. Interestingly, people will spend up to 5 seconds just looking at that first image, usually above the fold. And then secondly, the site's written content, roughly around 5 seconds as well from a content perspective. And then the other stuff that goes into it, like the bottom of the website, the logos, the footer elements, all that sort of stuff. So the idea here today is to show you a practical example. So we have got lots of questions coming in. So as we move through this, feel free to sing out. At the end of this, we're going to do a full Q&A as well. So we'll probably get through the content, put your questions in there. Very interactive. We want to hear your burning questions, and then we'll do our best to answer those. So step 1 is what we call wireframing. So Sammy, do you want to just talk a little bit about what is a wireframe and why, if you were embarking on a website design project, why would you bother doing a wireframe?
Yeah, so points on the right there, sorry, on the left there, there's a couple there, but basically in terms of summarizing this is laying out the pieces of the puzzle, right? There's a puzzle that we're trying to put together for this certain project and certain homepage, and that's just outlining each of those key pieces for that project that we need to include, and that's done from the infancy. So each project is going to have their own sort of quirk to it, their own sort of primary conversion, whether it's filling out a quote, conversion across the phone, or filling out contact form. And those key pieces we're trying to nut out initially, and then what goes into those wireframes are obviously those pieces plus the additional points. So it's like similar to an architectural blueprint, so it just defines all the fundamental pieces, and then just that clear overview of the page structure, the layout, information architecture, user flow, functionality. And at this point, normally you're not investing in any sort of, high fidelity design. It's more just as I said, the key pieces before we get into the nitty gritty design.
Sure. And there's lots of different ways to do wireframing. You could literally go and get a pad and a pen and start sketching away. You can do it on a whiteboard. We use a digital tool just because we're cranking these out. And basically, so this one's called Balsamic. As Sammy said, it's very low fidelity. There's no design layer on this. All we're trying to do is extract these elements. So in this instance, this is a flooring supplier based here at the Gold Coast in Southeast Queensland. And there were ultimately two things that we want an end user to do on this website, which is to either call this phone number or to fill out this quotation form. You can see here, this is what we call burger menu. We'll actually show you in the live environment what this burger menu does and how it interacts and the different menu items that exist under that. We have our primary headline, our secondary headline. In this instance, we organized a video shoot and a photo shoot for the client. We have a strong call to action above the fold. It's really critical that we're clear on what we want someone to do when they land on the website. As I said, people will spend around 5 to 6 seconds just going through the content. So this is an image. We work with the client in and around their copy. So we actually wrote this copy on their behalf. What we wanted to do was represent like how wide their range of products are. They've literally got thousands of products there that they pride themselves on their 5-star service and only install the best flooring solutions that they then have. This looks a little bit boring, but it'll make sense when we actually show you the design layer. But what this process forces the client and us to do is get really clear on what are the elements, what is the hierarchy of those elements, and what is the priority of those? Like, is there stuff that we need to get rid of? A big focus for them was their products. So these are different categories of products that they have. And if we say selected one of these categories like carpet, then we would see products that exist under each of those. So it actually forces a whole bunch of decisions to be made, which is really helpful when before you pass this off to a designer like Sammy, because he knows what he's actually working with. He knows the content, the blocks, the information that then need to be arranged and presented on screen. We have a gallery. We have some blog posts. We have an email opt-in. We have some footer elements. We personally love, obviously our websites have very strong search engine optimization focus. And we love to put like a little footer that has maybe some geographical keywords in there, some topical keywords around their products or their services. It's critical that you have an address, say in the footer as well, which is helpful for like schema.org, and just allowing Google to actually identify where the business geographically resides. And then you've got social media. Ideally, social media are like right down the bottom, because what you don't want someone to do is go off to Facebook and start watching cat videos or something like that. You want them to stay on there and be looking at your products. So that, everyone, is a wireframe. Anything to add onto that?
This is sort of, it's a good insight around how with a homepage and website in general, it's not just like aesthetics have a massive influence on how the consumer, I guess, consumes a certain product, and the more professional it is from a visual standpoint, obviously the better, because we just touched on those percentages at the start of the slideshow, but also how various different departments such as the SEO department, how they influence what goes into an actual homepage layout. Because there's no point in us getting all arty-farty and creating something that visually looks really good, but it's not going to rank well through Google. It's not going to bring in those new leads for you. And each of the pieces to this certain puzzle has been defined not just from that visual angle. It's from those SEO team members, content creation, all that sort of stuff. So
it is a delicate balance. We're really doing two things. We're trying to convert from a sales and a psychological perspective, but we're also trying to keep the Google gods happy. So that's the constant balance and the push and pull that we are fighting when we are building a new website. So step 2, Sammy has got his amazing wireframe that has been signed off by the client. And Sam gets briefed on this. Like, talk to us around just the mental process that you go through when you approach any new project.
Yeah, so that wireframe, as we said, that just defines the pieces. And then what I'm doing is I'm, understanding myself as the designer, the brand itself, the brand rules around, obviously the logo, color scheme, font families that are obviously going to work on web, but also complement the actual brand itself, send the right message. So on that, send the right message, obviously understanding the consumer at the end of the day. So we'll have a customer or a client that comes to us. They're obviously the owner of the organization. They're not the consumer. So sometimes we need to sort of look past them as a customer and figure out who is the actual consumer at the end of the day, and how are we going to send the correct messages while still connecting visually to the brand itself. And then various different components that weigh into that. So color palette again, which reflects the brand. So if I can't see the logo in a certain location, visually through a color code, I can still connect the brand in a subtle manner. So that sort of angles a bit, it happens at that subconscious level by the viewer of the website. Icon creation to support user experience. So once again, we don't have a lot of time. We don't want to bombard the viewer with a lot of content. Obviously, it's important to a certain degree, but using like icons to reflect certain sales pieces or key sales listings, you can use iconography to get that message across quite quickly. And then, clear visual paths within the design, which is what John touched on earlier around phone numbers, quote forms, those key pieces, and then putting in that content once again, which is what we've just touched on previously, having that copy there to assist in terms of how the website's actually ranked through your Google and whatnot.
I'd never noticed this, mate. So this is how clever Sam is. This was the client's logo. And you can see that he uses obviously the S in a square, and that signifies the tile and all that sort of stuff. But then what Sam's done is an extension of that, which I'll show you in the mock-up of what this site actually looks like. So we go from a pretty boring old wireframe to, look at this. This is a pretty schmicko, high-end looking site. And this is what I was referring to here, which is Sam's utilized like the logo in a very subtle way there to signify the play button. So this is a mock-up. We're designing in a tool called Sketch. Sketch pushes up to InVision. And this just allows us to sell the dream to a client. It allows us to say, client, this is what your brand spanking new website is going to look like. And as we sort of flow through this, these are all the elements that we've mapped out on screen. So what we might do is actually just talk about some of those key sort of finished products. Why don't we cover off on these points, and then we'll actually bring up like what the finished website looks like, Sammy, and that'll sort of illustrate some of these key points.
Yeah, so from those previous points that we just touched on, so we're combining all those previous elements into that well-designed, functional, high-performing homepage in itself. This is where we've dealt with the static design and sort of got to the point where John just showed you the high-fidelity design, and now we're starting to get into the development side of the design, where the developers are putting the code into the site, making it fully responsive, and when they're doing that, there's these additional pieces that we can add to the actual design of the site that are relevant to, I guess, keep the viewer engaged. So one of those being micro user experience interactions. So whether that's like directional cues, interaction on the button. So when you hover over the button, we're either showing a color change or some sort of motion, which keeps the viewer engaged in the website. Utilizing a well-balanced white space. So there's obviously too much white space and then sometimes not enough. And if there's not enough, then content can't be consumed by the viewer. There's too many graphical elements on the page, and that does the actual inverse of what you want to do with your design, which is push the viewer away. So there's definitely a balance with that white space. And then also getting into load time testing. So if we're utilizing, say, a movie in a website, it's all good and well to put that movie into the site to, once again, just show what the organization's about visually. But if it's going to take, a few seconds for that to actually load, what's the point? You're going to lose the viewer initially. So there's all those sort of, I guess, merging development components that the designers still need to be aware of and take note of.
Spot on. Yeah. And that's that balancing act that I was talking, where we're trying to put together really like nice, polished sales tool, but at the same time cover off on all the technical aspects like load time, like keeping Google happy, page speed insights, all that sort of stuff, right? And that's where you just need to try and find that balance. So like what was really critical here is we actually did a video shoot and a photo shoot with the client. And we put together, it's like a 7 or 8 second little video loop that loops around. They invest a lot of time and effort in their new showroom. We wanted to showcase that. So that shows the quality of the actual product and location and service and the experience that you would get with that. So you can see here, like we've got the burger navigation. Really, as I said, we wanted the user to do 2 things, either call or fill out the quote form. And then we've got all the other stuff that's basically still accessible through that. And that the user would just generally explore and find that. You know, all these little micro interactions, as you say, hover over a play button, hover over a button. Do you want to talk about some of these things, Sammy, around like what value do these little micro interactions actually add to, say, a homepage?
Yeah, it really comes down to the viewer feeling like they're actually a part of the product. So when they're interacting with the site, they're taking control and they're getting those, I guess, they're getting the recognition from the actual site itself, controlling this. And so that sort of allows them to keep engaged, you know, those sorts of things that they're not in control of, like that, and automatic rotation to draw attention to something that needs that hierarchy, which we do through all our designs. So.
Yeah. And then, you know, to give this, like, it's super subtle, but you can see that these are set up on almost different layers that scroll at different speeds as we move down the page. And it just adds a certain degree of sophistication to the website as well.
Yeah.
So that's that. Well, what does everyone think of this site? Like, is that cool? Can we get a thumbs up? I know there's a few questions in there. Let me just jump in here. Oh, Coco. So Coco, you mentioned, what do you mean by consumer avatar? Awesome question. So this is something that we would do in the very early stages when we're partnering with a client, in the fact that we need to really understand, like, who are our clients' what are their characteristics or attributes, their psychographics, their motivations, their aspirations, like what problem do you solve for these clients? Really interesting. We're just chatting with a training provider for beauticians, and they've done such a good job at defining this, where they've got 4 primary avatars. They've got their beauty mavens, their beauty nurturers, their beauty fixers, and their Hollywoods, right? And you can sort of cast your own imagination in terms of different attributes of each of those people. But that's the sort of stuff that we're digging into and really taking into consideration when we're putting together this design.
And the contrasting as well, like making sure that, you know, if we've got a clientele for a certain product that is quite a mature age group, you know, we've got to be making sure that our standard fundamental P-class paragraph styling has enough contrast on the page for legibility of content. So that's what we're sort of dealing with when we're talking about understanding the client.
Cool. Richard has asked, what WordPress themes do we tend to use? We actually use a slightly different approach, Richard. Yeah. Everything we do is custom design. So it's unique to the client, to the avatars that we're trying to communicate with, and to the outcomes that the client wants to achieve. And there's many different ways to be right, and using a theme is one way to be right. We choose a different approach that just gives us more flexibility from a design perspective. So essentially there's what we call a custom child theme that sits on top of that, and that's ultimately what Sam and the developers are responsible for putting together. And then we build that using a page building tool called Elementor. So this allows just generally a great end user experience from a client perspective to be able to manage the content moving forward, to drag and drop blocks, to pull in videos, to pull in galleries, to pull in testimonial blocks, you name it, you can do it through Elementor. It's awesome. It's super easy to use. It gives you great flexibility out of the box. And that's just generally how we've chosen to build our workflow. So hopefully that answers your question, Richard. So just jumping back to this, other items to consider. There's lots of stuff you can put in your homepage, and you don't have to put it all in. You saw that maybe the OneSource example doesn't use some of these things. We have sticky calls to action. So just to look really briefly, if we scroll here, this is for another training provider based at the Gold Coast. This here is a little sticky thing that basically prompts someone to do something highly technical. But that's what we call a sticky call to action. Years of experience style badge. This is more around a trust and a credibility perspective. So this school's been around for 30 years. Client logos. This school has worked with some pretty awesome clients, the Australian NRL, Gold Coast Suns, you name it. They've partnered with these sort of organizations. So that adds more trust and credibility to the website. USPs. So Sammy, do you want to talk about this? So this like we tend to include this. Like why would you sort of pick and choose these key pieces, and why visually represent it, do you think?
Yeah, those unique selling propositions is, once again, trying to reduce the digging by the viewer of the website. So they don't have to dig through copious amounts of paragraphs of content. No one really wants to do that. I know I don't want to do it.
No.
So what we do here is we try and figure out, for their target audience or for their consumer, what are the points that are really going to stand out to assist them in terms of converting, and once again, filling out those forms, picking the phone up, and it's just a snapshot really. And then we accommodate the textual points with those custom icons. So once again, it just supports them. Yeah.
We've got an amazing man on our team, Eddie. He's what we call our iconologist. He has literally designed thousands of icons for lots of different applications. And we don't use like off-the-shelf stock icons. We're designing each one of these. So they're all illustrated by hand. So these are all the little subtleties that go into it just to make just like a next level sort of homepage or product. Other things you can look at, certifications, associations. So Rona and her school, they're certified. They've got a bunch of associations. They're registratio providers, all this sort of stuff. So this is all just that credibility, testimonials, email opt-ins. As I mentioned, address on homepage, important from a schema.org markup perspective. Privacy policy. Google actually want to see a privacy policy, ideally there in the footer as well. So we're coming up to almost half an hour. I'm just conscious of time. Here we go. All right, some more questions here in the chat. Richard said, avatar, picture having a coffee with your ideal client, who they are, what they do, even who they're called. Love it. A picture of that client, even on your wall, when you're writing, when you're designing, it just allows you to hone that. So I love that, Richard. Thank you for that input. Jeremy, the effect of carpet swatches moving at different speeds as you scroll. Is this something referred to as parallax? That is
he knows his stuff. That's good.
Nice. That's cool. And then Suzanne, use Elementor with a WordPress template too. Yeah. So Elementor is like a plugin that bolts into WordPress. What it changes, like you can imagine if you've got your default like WordPress editor, what it does is it just takes over that and replaces that. It takes you, like you say, edit with Elementor, it opens up another screen, and basically you get that Elementor interface that I showed you on screen, Suzanne. Any other questions, feedback, comments? Has that been helpful? That's just some. Kelly's mentioned. Can you speak about color psychology? Which colors are most popular? All right, here we go, Sammy.
That's a webinar in itself, mate. And how it usually works is, there's color psychology. Certain colors can reflect, certain emotions, or you can take that route. the way that we like to approach it is from a brand consistency standpoint. So, for example, if I'm designing a website for Coke, I'm pretty sure all of you have got a color in your mind straight away for that. What we try and do is just keep it consistent with the brand. What we're trying not to do is bring in an orange because it reflects knowledge or learning, right? That's not their brand. So it's more from reflecting the brand instead of bringing in new colors to reflect or stimulate a certain new emotion type. That's how we approach it. And every brand's different. So yeah, that scenario I just talked you through, Coke, red, you'd run with that, and maybe you'd implement an additional complementary tone for accented points like a quoting form or something like that. So it was separated visually to draw attention by the viewer.
So Sammy, just an extension of that, Coco asked how to introduce color when logo is black and white.
Surely a brand would have additional color tones. Usually, well, if you open up OneSource again, John, that brand in itself was black and white brand. So the way that we approach it is, if color's not always needed, you can do it using contrast. So that's a black and white brand. Mm-hmm. We intentionally stuck to the brand, stayed true to it so we can visually represent it instead of bringing in those additional tones that may conflict with the brand. And I feel that there's enough contrast with black and white to lead the viewer in the direction that we want to take them.
Cool. And then David asked the question, some designers like WordPress and some don't. What are the advantages and disadvantages?
Elemental though on that, John, like it's not WordPress anymore for us really, you know what I mean? WordPress is just it just supports it. Elementor, if you're not familiar with it, it's amazing. It's gone are the days where you had to dig into that hard code or sort of navigate through some sloppy interface in the back end. It's amazing, that product.
It is. Yeah, and look, if you just look at the pure stats on WordPress, David, it's something like almost 40% of all websites are driven by WordPress. Out of the box, 80% of your SEO stuff is done by WordPress. You can get all these extensions like Elementor. There's just literally truckload of plugins that you can bolt into it. It ticks a lot of those boxes. Us as designers, we chose many years ago to go down the WordPress path, but does WordPress inform what Sam does from a design perspective? Not at all. Like the design layer and the WordPress layer are two separate things, right? The design layer sits on top of this functional WordPress layer. And then all WordPress allows us to do is really manage the content, manage the blocks, manage the information within the website. Hopefully that makes sense. Cool. Suzanne said, it's incredibly user-friendly for non-techos. And final question, just to round us out, is Elementor needed by me also to update our site once built, or can it just be used for the design and build phase? That is a really good question. The way Elementor run their plugin, it is a paid premium plugin just because it does awesome stuff and makes your life easy and solves a bunch of problems for you. I believe there's a small subscription fee every year to just keep that up to date. So you can buy Elementor as a one-off, but what will happen is they will continue to evolve, iterate, add new features, functionality, all that sort of stuff. There'll be security updates as well, which is a really critical point of that. And any really like paid or premium plugins are always going to have some sort of dollar figure associated with that. And it's worth it. Like for 70, 80 bucks a year, happy days. Like it just makes your life so much easier. So hopefully that answers your question, Paul. That is, we might just pull up stumps there. We'll call it a wrap. Can we give Samuel Horn a big round of applause? Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for taking the time out of your valuable days to listen to us talk about what we're passionate about, which is websites. So thank you very much. We will make a recording available of this. And we are having another lunch and learn. We are talking SEO next month. I encourage you to jump on, and we will be demystifying the black arts of
The black
SEO.
magic of web. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you.